The Royals snapped their three-game slide on the back of their ace. What do we think about it? We'll dive into it next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing over there. So you know I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But as for this podcast, when you come here, when you click on this link, you know that you get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go, one of the more popular mobile games out there. It's downloaded over 150 million times. I have really enjoyed playing it, whether it be at work, it be at home, or I just have time to pass. So I suggest you do the same thing. You can find it on the Google Play or the App Store, and it's free to download. Lots of fun on Monopoly Go. It was also lots of fun that the Royals snapped their three-game losing streak earlier tonight on the back of another phenomenal performance from Cole Ragans, who on the road this year has been virtually unhittable. Tonight was the first time he gave up a run, and he still went 6 2/3 with 9 strikeouts, tying a season high, and only gave up, I believe, 4 hits in total. So was just dominant against the Blue Jays lineup that we know has some big-time pop in it. The deal with George Springer. You got to deal with Vladdy Jr. You got to deal with Bo Bichette, Justin Turner. Fortunately, tonight didn't have to deal with Dalton Varsho, which seems to be a big problem for Royals pitching this year. I'm very ecstatic that tomorrow might be the last time. In fact, it will be the last time the Royals will see Dalton Varsho in the regular season, unless the Blue Jays just bottom out their sellers at the deadline and they trade him to a team the Royals have yet to face on their schedule. But very happy that tomorrow was the last time the Royals see the Blue Jays this season. I haven't been a huge fan of the way the scheduling has been in April, where you might see a team one week and then the next week you see them just at your place or you're on the road playing them. So as of tomorrow, when it is about 5 or 6 o'clock Central Time, which is where I'm based, the Royals will no longer see the Blue Jays or the Orioles for the rest of the regular season. The only way they'd run into them again is if it were in the postseason, which I would have, because the Royals would first and foremost be in the postseason. But tonight, I think I got a little bit of a dream scenario or a glimpse, hopefully, into the future. And that is, you can trust Cole Ragans to be your stopper. And I know that's been thrown around loosely for the Royals over the last, give or take, 5 years, a half decade, trying to find your stopper. I mean, we've used it so loosely on a handful of guys. We used it loosely on Brad Keller back in 2019 and 2020. Oh, he's the workhorse. He's the stopper. When you're on a losing streak, you turn to this guy. In 2022, we put it on Brady Singer. Brady Singer was the stopper. Amidst all that losing, you could turn to this guy every 5th day, and he was going to give you a really good chance to win. None of those guys were truly stoppers. Zach Greinke last year was not a stopper. They didn't have any stoppers, for that matter, until Cole Ragans joined the rotation. But I also would say a stopper is really put up to the test when their team is playing meaningful games for the standings. Not pointless games last year for this team. It was all about growing and evaluating the team. But for the standings, it didn't really matter. We are seeing this year Cole Ragans either be the guy that can take this team to the next level, or he can put an immediate halt to a losing streak. And tonight was not easy. The Royals offense was facing Jose Barrios, had one of the lowest ERAs in all of baseball, certainly in the American League. And the Royals, fortunately, could counter with their ace. And it has been a very long time since they've had somebody like this. And I know we all had a scare in the 7th inning when he exited, kind of bent over a little bit. He had thrown 105 pitches, and at least my mind went to, please God, no. Don't let this be the final pitch. Of course, it's overreacting at its finest, but I think that we've all been on pins and needles when discussing Cole Ragans' past health concerns, having two Tommy Johns technically, even though I've described it before as he had Tommy John, and then it just never fully healed, so it was a second Tommy John surgery. But of course, I think for a lot of people out there, the mind raced to that of, oh no, did we leave him in too long? Why is he bending over? What's in pain? Well, the good thing was it was a leg cramp. And once he got to the dugout, he was very engaged with his teammates. He didn't go straight to the clubhouse. If that was the case, it would have been trouble, I think, for Cole Ragans and maybe his future outings here in Kansas City for 2024. But you don't need to worry about it now. He dazzled once again. He faced a lineup for the second time in a week, and that is always incredibly difficult to do because they've got a book on you. They know what you're going to throw most of the time. But the best ones out there can get by him for a second outing. They can really look good. They can grind through 6. Well, tonight wasn't really grinding through 6. He dominated. He shoved through 6 2/3. Got a little bit fatigued at the end, but we've seen that in a couple of Cole Ragans' starts this year. Against the Mets, we saw it. Against the Orioles, we saw it. In Baltimore, not for Kansas City. He only got to the second inning. But in those road starts against the Mets and that road start against Baltimore, you saw the fatigue set in late. The command wasn't really there. He walked a couple of guys. So that, I think, is going to be another growing part of his game of how can I bear down here when I'm really emptying the tank? I'm on fumes. I just need to get one more out. He did it successfully in the Mets game. Didn't in Baltimore, didn't tonight. But you take 6 2/3 and 1 run from your ace every single time out. And when I go back to this dream scenario, I understand that the regular season is always going to be different from the postseason. But I kind of had a chance to sit back and just think about a potential future of this team actually getting into the playoffs, this team getting into a wild card series. And if they are the lowest seed, which I would still be fine with, and they got to go on the road, I feel really good about Cole Ragans throwing on the road. There's something about it. And even last year, I thought he was really good on the road when he started for the Royals. There were a couple starts toward the end it got away from him. Like the final 2 outs of his outing, it just slipped away from him. But this year, you are just seeing a different guy. His ERA is under 0.50 in about 20 innings. He struck out north of 20 guys in those 20 innings. He's walked less than 5 guys. I mean, virtually unhittable. And that is a very intriguing part about him because he hasn't been that good at home. He was great, I would say, on opening day. He set the Royals record for opening day strikeouts, but was bested by Pablo Lopez. Then he gives up 7 runs against the Baltimore Orioles. Exits in the second inning. Then he only got to pitch 5 innings before a rainout, but even then you weren't seeing this overpowering, dominant-looking version of him. Tonight, that was as dominant as he's looked all season long. Fastball hit 99 on pitch 97 of the night. I mean, that's just freaky stuff. And, of course, right now, the talk of the American League Central in terms of a pitcher is Tarik Skubal, who the Royals saw on Sunday. And he rightfully will get the majority of the talk. He's been phenomenal. He's had less bad outings than Cole Ragans. But I think I would take Cole Ragans just about anybody, up against anybody at this point in time. I mean, I know you had the 7-run outing against Baltimore, but you just feel like every time he takes the mound, it doesn't matter what lineup he's facing. It's going to be very tough for a team to string together hits in the way Baltimore did. And Baltimore was just able to foul him off over and over and over again. They were able to doink a couple of singles in the right spots, and then they started hitting him hard. But as for the rest of the teams he's faced, it's pretty damn hard to get consecutive hits off of him. The Blue Jays got it, tonight in the 6th inning, and then here came Justin Turner with the go-ahead run on first base, and he blew him away on 3 pitches. Just fastball, fastball, fastball. And that shows you how dominant he can be. It is such a marvel that the Royals have him in the rotation. And he's looked like this so far. I mean, I still think the best is yet to come. I think a really good streak, a really good stretch of games is coming. A couple of outings where it's just 6 innings, 8 Ks, 9 Ks, maybe some double-digit K outings, and he's able to keep everybody under 3 runs. I can see that stretch happening. I don't envision another poor start in the one he had against Baltimore anytime soon, if not for the rest of the season. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about the American League Central, who just has 4 teams right now firing on all cylinders. Is that a good thing for the Royals? Is it a bad thing? Are teams going to regress? We'll talk about it all next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you are looking to place some bets on the playoff game, might I suggest you go to prop betting. You bet on point totals. You bet on rebound totals, assist totals, maybe over-unders in the first half. That seems to be my wheelhouse. I've made that very vocal over the last few months here on the show. So if you're thinking about it, thinking about placing a bet, go over to FanDuel and start winning some money today. Well, as I'm doing this podcast episode, the Twins and White Sox are still playing, and the Guardians and the Astros are still playing. It has been so fitting, right? By the way, that, Cleveland, they have just played some teams at the exact right time. And Minnesota, I think, even more so than that. Minnesota got Chicago, the Angels, and now Chicago again. They've won 8 in a row, and by the time I finish this podcast, they'll either be winners of 9 in a row or they'll have their winning streak snap. But they're immediately back in the hunt. There are 4 teams in this division. Of the 5, of course, we know the White Sox being one of the worst teams in baseball at right now 6-23. Could be 7-23 or 6-24 by the time this is wrapped up. But 4 teams above 500. The Guardians have one of the best records in baseball, and if I'm not mistaken, it's still the best in baseball. Then you got the Royals in second place. They're 18-13. They just set a franchise record for wins in the month of April. They're in second. Detroit, who took a series from Detroit from Kansas City over the weekend, they are right behind Kansas City. They're a half game back. And Minnesota is on this red-hot winning streak, just taking advantage of playing terrible teams. And the White Sox twice and the Angels, who are now without Mike Trout, but are about to be 10 games under 500, they're right back in the swing of things, and they're going to get healthier. So the American League Central, which I mocked all offseason, I said this is just a putrid division. It's up for grabs. It can be anybody's. Still technically true, but you just have much better teams and much more improved teams. Now, it is not going to be like this all year long. There's not going to be 4 teams that finish with 500 records or better. Somebody is going to bottom out. Somebody's not going to be healthy. And you pray to God the Royals are not one of those teams. You pray it's Detroit. You pray it's Minnesota. You pray it's Cleveland. And the crazy thing about this all, I don't think any of these teams are immune to that. I think every one of these teams, as good as they've looked in April, can collapse at any point. At the same time, any one of these teams can really catch fire. I have been pleasantly surprised by what this division has shown. But it also should tell you that this was as good a year as ever to stay the course and continue to remain consistent in the win-loss column. You couldn't afford to lose 6 or 7 in a row in April, like the Royals have done plenty of times in the past. You couldn't afford to start 3-10. I mean, the White Sox, though they've played better of late, are completely buried because of where they are. Even if Cleveland was not where they're at, 10 games over 500, and they were down to Houston tonight, 8-3. Of course, it's 8-8 right now. I mean, you just can't put away Cleveland. But even Cleveland, they're without their ace and Shane Bieber. Minnesota, their bullpen's banged up. Their lineup's banged up. Detroit, I think they are just exactly the same as Kansas City. Sluggish offense, good rotation, good bullpen. They are carbon copy of each other. And I can't wait to see these teams play in Kansas City in a few weeks. I believe it is going to be just under 3 weeks. The Tigers are going to come to Kauffman Stadium. Those two are very similar. And they might be neck and neck all season long. But the American League Central has clearly changed its perception of what people view it as. Last year, nobody gave the Twins any credit for winning that division because it was so damn bad. Second place was under 500. It was Cleveland. Or maybe it was Detroit, but I still think they were under 500. Cleveland was under 500. The Royals and White Sox had both lost over 100 games. It was a garbage, awful, terrible, no good. Think about any bad word you could say. It was that bad of a division. This year, they just flipped the script. And it's not an overly expensive division. Nobody spent a lot of money with the exception of the Royals in this division. Minnesota didn't do anything. Cleveland didn't do anything. The White Sox didn't do anything. Detroit and Kansas City spent money, and they're second and third in the division right now. I mean, it is just wild to think that this is where we're at with the American League Central. Now, as I said, I think when May concludes, somebody will have fallen out of this race a little bit. I do firmly believe that. Maybe not completely out of it, but I do think there's going to be some separation. I don't think that you're going to have fourth place 3 games back of first. I think there's going to be a cushion where you'll have the White Sox 15 to 20 games back, and then fourth place will be about 7 to 8 games back. Then you're going to have third place, who's roughly 4 or 5 games back, and then second place will likely be anywhere from a game to 3 games back. That's how I see this division really shaping out and looking over the course of not just May, but the rest of this summer. We had an AL Central preview right before the season started. It was a lot of fun. We had Locked On Guardians there. We had Locked On Tigers there. We had Locked On Twins there, and myself. And a great point that was made was that at the time, the clear-cut favorite was Minnesota. Just coming off the year they had, they still returned a lot of the same players. This was before we really figured out all the injuries they had in the bullpen. But a great point was made of, there's first place, and then there's not going to be a lot of separation between second and fourth. There's going to be a fifth place team, which happened to be the White Sox, and we all pretty much agreed on that. But the Tigers, Cleveland, and the Royals all could be interchangeable. Whereas second place at the end of the year could be anywhere from 82 and 80 to maybe 78 and 84. But fourth place was going to be in the 70s for their win totals. Like, that's what we all came to the conclusion of. And I stand by that. I think that it's going to be a dogfight between first, second, third, and fourth place. And that's what makes this division great. I don't think there's going to be a runaway. The good thing is, with the expanded playoffs, it's not always about first place. It would be nice to win the division because then you go straight to the American League Divisional Series, or actually you host the Wild Card Series. I think that's the way based off seeding now. So you don't go straight to the ALDS. I think the number 1 seed gets that bye. But, or actually, no, that is, I think, right? If I'm not mistaken. Because Minnesota won the division last year, hosted Toronto. That was a Wild Card Series. I'm going to get that all ironed out. But if you do win the division, you're playing at home. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. If the Royals are a bottom seed and they're a wild card team, they got to go play on the road, and they'll have to take 2 of 3 on the road. That's the way the wild card series works now. But that's what I'm saying is the good thing about a competitive division. Right now, there's a lot of teams in the playoff picture from the American League Central. I don't envision that being that way all year long. But as I said yesterday, it's a 40-game sample size. A 40-game sample size is when I really think you can get a firm grasp as to who your team is going to be. It is not everything because there's still 122 more games to go. But a 40-game sample size, I think you're going to know how good your team is reasonably going to be throughout the summer. You're not going to be blindsided by them being, let's say for the Royals' sake, 25 and that'd be too high. That'd be a really impressive stretch of late. Let's go with 23 and 17. I think you can make a pretty firm assessment that the Royals are going to be hovering around 500 to slightly above that throughout the season. They're going to go through losing streaks, but those losing streaks are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Maybe the best is still to come for the Royals. You just hope the worst that has happened was those 3-game losing streaks you saw in April. That would be the best case scenario, but I know we're going to see a rough stretch of play at some point because, quite frankly, everybody goes through a really rough stretch of play throughout 162. Well, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's next for this Royals team. What needs to improve? What do they need to stay consistent on? And what do they need to make sure doesn't fall back down to earth? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. But before we do that, we want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's dive into what's next for the Royals, how they can improve, and how can they stay consistent. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And you can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we go any further and wrap up the show, let's give a shout out to the final sponsor today in DoorDash. Want to make mom smile? Start Mother's Day with flowers or surprise her with gifts from brands she loves delivered the very same day with DoorDash. As we always say, moms are a gift, so give her the best this Mother's Day. Get gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. Select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the best of tech to self-care essentials and more delivered right to her door. Get all of your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB. Order using DoorDash today. Those terms apply. Well, the calendar flips over tomorrow. The Royals will see Toronto one more time. They'll have an off day on Thursday. Then they're going to come home for a homestand. That includes the Texas Rangers, the reigning World Series champions, and then they are also going to see the Milwaukee Brewers, who are red hot on the National League side of things. So it's going to be a fun homestand. A lot of competition, and then they are going to head off for their West Coast road trip. They'll see the Angels without Mike Trout, a really bad baseball team at this point, and they're going to see a Seattle Mariners team that is just thriving with their pitching staff right now. So still some tough opponents on the way, but you asked the question of how can they stay consistent? How can they stay the course? They're 18-13. They just set the franchise record for wins in the month of April. And as I was doing that read, as I was prepping to do this final segment, the Twins just won their 9th straight. So the American League Central continues to stay very, very competitive. Cleveland and Houston are still playing. And that kind of goes into this question. How can you make sure you are not that team that gets buried with the White Sox? How do you make sure all of this good fortune just goes by the wayside in the following month? Well, at the forefront of everything, at the top of the list, they got to figure out some of the slumps with these guys. Hopefully, Vinny Pasquantino with his RBI double tonight gets fixed. Hopefully, MJ Melendez figures out whatever is going on. Hopefully, Nelson Velasquez can. Hopefully, Hunter Renfroe can. I will say this, because I believe we touched on it a little bit last night. I am floored. The Royals are 18-13, and it goes to show you how good the starting rotation has been and how consistent the bullpen has been for the most part. I'm amazed they're 5 games over 500 with Vinny Pasquantino going through 2 brutal stretches, MJ Melendez going through a brutal stretch, Nelson Velasquez going through a brutal stretch, Kyle Isbell going through a brutal stretch, Hunter Renfroe going through a brutal stretch, Michael Garcia going through a brutal stretch. I mean, everybody but Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez has gone through a really rough stretch. And yet they're 5 games over 500. That does have to correct itself. That does have to get better if this team is going to stay in the hunt all season long. They can't have this many guys hitting sub 200. The rotation is going to come back down to earth at some point. Seth Lugo is not going to have a sub-2 ERA this year. I think that he will likely hang in the 3.5s, 3.6. Cole Ragans, I think, is giving you what he's probably going to give you this year. Michael Wacha, probably giving you what he's going to give you, sprinkled in with some really good quality starts from time to time. Alec Marsh, just because he's so young, is likely going to have some regression. Same thing with Brady Singer. I think Brady Singer is not a sub 3.00 ERA guy. So you're going to have that group come back down to earth, but you're hoping your offense can rise back from the dirt, rise back from the dead. Because it can be infuriating to just watch all of these guys go not just up and down. I mean, we're talking about becoming a black hole in the lineup. That offense has to improve. It just has to. I think the bullpen has figured out their most reliable guys out there. You've seen some pleasant surprises, John Schreiber being one, Angel Serpa being another. You've had some disappointments. I mean, Chris Stratton's ERA doesn't look great right now. I wouldn't call him a disappointment because April ERAs for bullpen guys are going to get inflated off of one bad outing. James MacArthur has been another pleasant surprise. Will Smith has been a disappointment. You hope the bullpen remains consistent. So we're talking about what needs to improve, what needs to stay consistent, and then what's one thing that you feel like is going to regress, but you're going to have to just stay the course, make sure it doesn't bottom out. There's the rotation when talking about regression, but making sure it's not a severe decline, a severe regression. I'm at that point with the rotation. The bullpen, got to stay the course. I can live with the bullpen just pitching like this every single night. And then what just has to improve, not everybody in the lineup, but the guys that are important pieces. Vinny Pasquantino, MJ Melendez, Hunter Renfroe. You have to get more from those guys. You can't have Hunter Renfroe hitting 130. You can't have MJ Melendez hitting 170. You can't have, somebody like Vinny Pasquantino hitting in the low 200s. And I think a lot of it right now is coming down to poor plate appearances, falling behind. I mean, MJ Melendez tonight was a little bit unlucky like he was on Monday night. But still, I mean, I don't think the approach is the best right now. Nelson Velasquez, the approach is not the best right now. You can't keep having these 0 for 26s, these 1 for 28s. You can't have those. Those are hopefully the worst stretches we will see all season long. But until they're snapped, they're going to just continue to bring this offense down, to continue bringing this lineup down. So that's where I'm at with this offense. That's where I'm at with this bullpen. And that finally is where I'm at with this rotation heading into the month of May. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available for free on the Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap up with a recap of that Blue Jays homestand, Blue Jays road trip, We're going to talk about Seth Lugo and what he looked like in his start, and if anybody has broken out of that slump. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.